Hey everyone, welcome to part 3 of my Road of the King review. It's a book by Patrick Hoban. If you haven't watched the first two parts of my review, I'd recommend doing that now because I will refer back to those. So I did listen to your guys' advice for the people who told me what I should do differently. I'm going to try to make these a bit shorter. I'm still going to try to get in all of the main points and expound upon them, but I will try to pick up the pace a little. Um, Bad news is with the last review that I did, it was about building blocks, and I thought I'd covered all of that section, but there are actually a couple of sections that I didn't get to cover. So I'm going to do those real quick right now before we get into the next section, which is on the circle. Um, so the last couple of sections of the building blocks, it talks about thinking models where if you watched my last review, you'll say that the building block section kind of read too much like a psychology textbook, and in this it sort of continues with that. Like it gives these definitions on different types of thinking, like top down thinking, bottom up, inversion, all of these, and he just kind of just sort of gives a brief definition, a couple of paragraphs. A lot of these I don't really see how it pertains to Yu-Gi-Oh. I mean, I read over these and I know, oh, this thinking model is kind of more of me, and then this one, not so me. Like, I definitely prefer top-down thinking far more than bottom-up thinking. That's just kind of the way that my brain is wired, but he doesn't really necessarily say, like, which types of these thinking models are good or like how we can apply them. He just sort of like defines them and move on, which to me it just seems very fillery. I don't see the point. And he also talks about motivation. That's in that last building block section before we move on to the circle. He talks about motivation, which I think is an interesting topic. And I almost think, maybe he could have like talked more about it because when it comes to success in anything, I think motivation is like extremely, extremely important. Even more so, really in Yu-Gi-Oh, because there's not really any kinds of tangible motivation. Like the prize support in this game is like zero, so most people are not going to be motivated by that. So if you do want to be motivated, you kind of have to find some sort of motivation within. So he like has a page on that, and he makes a few interesting points, but I think this could have been a bit longer. Um, he says that goals are counterproductive. Kind of this idea that, like, he gives the example, like, oh, if I need a 3.0 GPA to keep my scholarship, then I'll only try to get a 3.0, and, it might make me work less. And then, since I'm only trying to get a 3.0, I might accidentally get like a 2.9 and then, like, fuck up. Which I think that's certainly true for some people. I mean, not for me. Like, I only need a 3.0 to keep my scholarships. And, my first year in college, I did terrible. Ever since then, I've been getting, like, practically a 4.0, which it didn't really come from, like, material motivation. It didn't come from, oh, I need to get a 3.0 to do X, Y, and Z. It kind of just came from a change in mentality that I had where I kind of said, okay, I need to take this seriously. Like, just doing the bare minimum isn't going to get me what I want in life, and I won't be happy doing that. I will say for me personally, something that really motivated me in Yu-Gi-Oh, which kind of relates to the next section where he talks about the circle. So this is kind of a good transition, I guess. Um, when I went to, started going to my first competitive locals in Mosey, I kind of became friends with like, or not even friends, I'd say associated with, because some of them like weren't really like friends, as in like we hung out and even necessarily liked each other, but the people that I associated with were just far better than me, and a lot of them would just straight up tell me that like, Alan, you're terrible at this game, and me being around like all of these players that were just like way better than me at the time and telling me, "Oh, Alan, you're never going to go to nationals. You're like, you're never going to top a shonen jump. You're never going to do all these things like that." That motivated me to do those things. And for me, I did have goals, and for me it was helpful. I mean, for a year it was my goal to top a regional, and at my first regional I went like 3-4, and then at my next regional I went 5-3, and then I went 5-3 a few times again, and then I started going 6-2, and then I went 6-2 again, and then I went 6-2 the time after that, then I went 6-2 another time, and then another time, I lost my last round and got ninth. And then, after all of that for like, I don't know, like almost about a year and a half in a row, like I finally topped. So for me, having all those people, Alan, you're never going to top a regional, I think really sort of drove me to become good. But that's the thing, like I think motivation really works. Like, it's my belief. Like, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but I think different people are motivated by different things. Um, and I think, if I was like, writing a book where like motivation was like a key part of it, whether it was a Yu-Gi-Oh book or another book, I might, talk to a lot of different people, sort of find out what motivated them all, and then sort of put all of those different views in there and make that like a stronger part of the book. Because at the end of the day, like, you can read this whole book and understand all of it, but if you're not motivated to do the things that he's talking about in this book, then it just doesn't matter at all. So, me personally, I think he should have focused more on that. And then the other thing he sort of talks about is like this growth mindset, which kind of goes along with motivation. And he uses like all of these like Apple analogies and sort of talks about like various success stories outside of the game. Um, and to some extent, like, I don't know why he does this. To some extent, I think it's he's like trying to like call himself like the Steve Jobs of Yu-Gi-Oh, which is kind of a little arrogant. I think he's sort of trying to like hype himself up in his own book, and it seems like he's almost like trying to be like a life coach in a way. Like, oh, you got to like do all these things to be successful, which, I mean, like, this whole section on growth mindset to me just doesn't seem particularly relevant to Yu-Gi-Oh. It seems mostly, about like one of those motivational videos that you watch on YouTube, just do it, like one of those sort of things. Like, it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't seem particularly helpful for him to like tell us all these stories about like Steve Jobs. Like, yeah, they're kind of interesting, but I mean, he like makes all of these like Silicon Valley comparisons a lot throughout these couple of sections, and to me, like, they're just not the same. Like, Yu-Gi-Oh and Silicon Valley are just not at all comparable. That's just my opinion. So moving on to the circle, the section that we're actually here to talk about. I was just wrapping up that previous section. Basically, the whole first part of the section, it's sort of like a Patrick Hoban biography success story kind of thing, where he talks about how he met the Leveretts and how he met Desmond Johnson, and then how he like met Chris LeBlanc, and then he kind of like brags collectively that, oh, we all have 67 tops put together, and we've like defined every format for almost 3 years, which I mean is probably true. I mean, I don't think he's just outright wrong about that. It seems that was certainly the case. And then he also discusses sort of the purpose of the circle. It's to play test and it's to theory craft, and you want some people who can do both, and you kind of want everyone to be on the same page. And he says, this is who you should let into the circle, and this is who you shouldn't let into the circle. And these are all the qualities that you need to have. And let me actually just list off the qualities that he gives, because I think it's important. I'm just scrolling down. Oh, here they are. Desired circle qualities checklist: small, tightly knit group, expands circle of competence, trustworthy, rational, willingness to challenge others, skillful, enjoyable, dedication to similar ambitions, good work ethic, willingness to work, which to me seems like the exact same thing as good work ethic, but that's not the point. Availability, close proximity, integration of playtest and theory, and create a great culture. That's who he says, like, the people should have, all those qualities in your circle. And to me, it's very obvious, first of all, that Hoban did build a circle that was successful. I mean, that much is obvious. Like he says, they've accomplished all of these great things. And this section to me is almost like, again, it reads like a little like a biography, in the sense of, here's what I did and here's what it worked out for me. Not so much how you can do the same thing. Like, him meeting the Leverets is like all of this sort of like chance meeting, and then him meeting Desmond is also this chance meeting, and then like he meets Crystal Blanc because Crystal Blanc like just randomly decides to like move from Massachusetts to Georgia. And I hate to say this, but if we look at, all of these successful, he uses the word circle. Some people would use the word team or play group or whatever. But if you look at all of these successful circles in the history of the game, I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. These people got very lucky. And I don't mean lucky like, oh, they, drew the nuts in tournament all the time. I'm not talking about that kind of luck at all. That's not what I'm referring to. I mean that they are very lucky to have a bunch of people who meet, these qualities that he expresses, that just all happen to live in the same area. First example being in 2003, 2004. The first, great team, Comic Odyssey, right? There's just all of these talented players that all just like happen to go to the same locals, just coincidentally. And then you look at Team Overdose, a bunch of guys in sort of the New York, New Jersey area. Just a bunch of guys that all happen to be very motivated and talented, and they all just happen to live like right next to each other. And you look at Team Super Friends up in Canada, right? You had the Bolito brothers and Matt Petal, like they just happened to live together, right? And to me, if this sounds, like I'm being kind of bitchy or whatever, sure, think what you want, but me personally, I talked about how, in 2007, 2008, there were all these players who were better than me that kind of like, forced me up to their level by saying, oh, Alan, you're so bad, you're never gonna, do X, Y, and Z. So I found the motivation to do that. But, in around the sort of 2009 area, all those players quit. And, to this day, like, I barely even, like, touch the game at all. And yet I'm just dramatically better than, like, everyone in the Central Florida area. Like, this isn't me trying to, like, say that I'm the greatest thing ever. Like, I'm not that great. I haven't accomplished that much. Certainly nowhere near what Hoban has. And that's kind of my whole point, is that if you live in Tampa and you can't find players that are even as good as I am, how the heck are you ever going to be as good as Hoban is? So, that was kind of an issue for me, was that, just at the time when it mattered, in the roughly 2010 to 2013 era, there were just not like a ton of really great players in our area that, sort of had the qualities on this list. And I don't know, like, what people who don't live in one of those hot spots, so to speak, are supposed to do exactly. I mean, you can't just make them appear out of thin air. So, really, I mentioned at the end of my last review that for me, one of my issues was, this inability to, put together a circle. And for a while we kind of did have one at the Game Academy Tampa. It was like me, like Jake Mattern, Juan Morales, like Alex Bunce, and Sam Jones, which like all those people I'm sure like, you guys have like never even heard of. But for like a brief period in time, like we kind of sort of like had something, but then like no one really wanted to put in the effort, so it kind of just like went away. Um, so again, to me, the issue with this section is someone can't read this section and then just like replicate Hoban's success. Like, I obviously can't go, oh, okay, so I'm just going to just run into the Leverets on the streets, and then just happen to run into Desmond and happen to run into Chris LeBlanc, and we'll all work together, and then we'll all be great. Like, that's obviously that exact thing isn't going to happen because that's not how the world works, right? Um, so I don't know. I was really disappointed with this section because it just seemed more of like him bragging about, oh, we tested like 20 hours a day, and we all have 100 billion tops, and like we're just all the best. And it's like, okay, I get that, but you're not explaining how someone else is supposed to duplicate that, other than just, hey, if you happen to find people who are just exactly like these people that want to work with you, then you should do that. Well, I mean, no shit. Like, I mean, it's easy to say, it's a lot harder to do. And so, if I doubt Hoban's even watching this video, but if you are, tell me, what would you have done if you had just lived out in the middle of frickin' Kansas or somewhere, and there's just like no one good within 300 miles of you? Like, what's your plan then? Like, yeah, there is the internet, of course, which, I mean, to be honest, the people that I met on the internet helped me a lot, and that was kind of my go-to as well. But the internet has its limits, and it's not the same as what he did. So, I'm not trying to say that, oh, really I'm just as good as Hoban, and um, he just owes it all to the Leverets or whatever. Not that at all. I mean, Hoban is obviously a much better and more accomplished player than I am. But to people who don't just live in a hotspot, like, I don't know what we're supposed to do. Um, that's kind of my gripe there, I guess. Something else that he talks about. He kind of has like a little mini section where he says, "Don't be results oriented," which is something that I highly agree with. It's something that I tell people a lot, but I don't really see how it's relevant to this section on the circle. I mean, he makes very good points about being results oriented. I agree 100%. I'm just not sure if it was the best place to put it in the book. I will also say, as far as this section, he has very good advice on how to get the most out of playtesting. I, of course, haven't read the rest of the book yet, but I would guess that section on playtesting will probably be the one of the most, if not the most useful section in the entire book. He talks about like creating artificial scenarios, like if you want to see like how good Soul Charge is when you open it, then just have it in your opening hand every game, so you can like test that theory rather than just playing a bunch of games and maybe never opening with Soul Charge 10 games in a row and wasting that time. He also says to allow takebacks in testing, which is something that I agree with. Like, when I'm testing with someone, I'm not trying to see who wins when we just both punt it back and forth. I want to see who wins the matchup when we're both playing close to perfectly. So if I ever am testing with someone and they just do something completely stupid, I can't even like think of a great example, but if they like just synchro for like the obviously wrong monster or something, and they put it into play and say, oh wait, I don't want to make Stardust Dragon, why would I do that? And then they like, take it back and put something else into play. I'll let them do that in testing. I would never let someone do that in a tournament, of course, because my goal there is to win. But when you're testing, the goal isn't to test against people who are playing terrible. Like, sometimes I'll actually even help them when I'm testing. I'll be like, hey, you did this, but, what I really think you should have done is this. And if you want to take it back and do that, I will happily let you do so. I mean, that's to the extent that I will do that. So I do agree there. The only thing that I disagree with on his playtesting sort of ritual is he says that he like constantly changes the deck. Like, if he's testing I don't know, whatever. Say he's testing like Monarchs or something. If it's today, he'll like test a match with Monarchs, and then like change a few cards in the Monarch deck, and then like test again, and then change a few cards, and then test again. And to me, it seems like that makes it hard to get good data because then like he emphasizes the importance of getting like a high sample, but then he says like change the deck a lot. So to me, like that's a little self-contradicting. What I do when I test, like say, I sort of have my gauntlet of, the good decks. Like I guess right now it'd be, Monarchs and, Burning Abyss and Cosmos and Pendulums. Those are like kind of the main four, as far as I know. Don't hold me to that. I would sort of make like the standard build of all of those, right? Like I would sort of have a very standard Monarch list, very standard Burning Abyss list, very standard Cosmo list, very standard Pendulum list. I test them all against each other, and sort of, because I assume that most lists I'll play against in the tournament are close to that standard list. So once I test all the standard lists and sort of figure out what the matchup is when you're playing the standard builds, I might then, fine tune and mess around with the decks a little and see if it changes. Like if I test, say Burning Abyss versus, Cosmos, and I see that with the standard builds, Burning Abyss is winning 70% of the time. I actually have no idea what the matchup is, but we're just going to roll with it. If I see that, okay, if the standard build's at 70% of the time, I might try, like, changing the Cosmo build slightly and then seeing if that affects the matchup. Is it still 70-30, or now is it, like, 50-50? And that might, sort of get, it might give me some ideas. Like, I noticed that, the matchup is this way and we use standard builds, but if we change the list slightly, we get a very different result. So, to me, I do that a bit more deliberately, whereas he kind of says, like, oh, yeah, like, even if I know that this card should be in every single deck list, I'll, like, test without it anyways. Which, I mean, maybe there's a point to that. Like, I assume he's doing this for a reason, but he doesn't really make it clear what the point is exactly. So, I mean, that's something that I disagree with. But all of the other advice that he gives on playtesting, I agree with. Like, 90% of the section on playtesting I agree with, and I think it's very useful, and I think that something that the Yu-Gi-Oh community really needs to work on is better playtesting. I think that's something that just so many players are doing wrong, and I think that probably, based on what I've read so far, I think how Hoban playtests might be a big reason for his success. So, if you do get the book, I would, really make sure that you follow his advice on playtesting, because, like, for the most part, I couldn't agree more with what he's saying there. So that wraps it up, I think, for the most part. He talks about the circle. Overall, I didn't get what I wanted out of the section. I kind of wanted to know, because to me, that was kind of like one of the big failures in my career. I'm not talking about failures as in results. It was just something that I felt like, it felt kind of hopeless to me. Like, it just seemed like as the years went by, it seemed like there became less and less players that were, like, on the same competence level as me that I could test with. And, rather than more and more, which is kind of unfortunate. Obviously, as I get better and better, I want to see the players around me get better and better, not get, like, worse and worse. Which is kind of unfortunate. So, I don't really know what I was supposed to do there. I mean, I don't know. And, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but it was just kind of disappointing. And, there are certainly some people that I, tried to sort of make it work with. Like, for a while, Michael Lux was kind of like my go-to guy for, testing and figuring out the best deck and whatnot. But, he and I kind of seem to be on like a different wavelength. We thought about things very differently. You know, he would sort of be like, he'd go into a tournament and just being like, oh, I'm gonna play like, the Rescue Rabbit deck or whatever. And I'd kind of be like, huh, well, that's interesting. I think this other deck is better. Could you explain like why you like the Rescue Rabbit deck? And he'd just kind of be like, I just like it, and I'm gonna play, Rescue Rabbit. You can play whatever you want, but this is what I'm playing. And to me, that's not helpful. Just kind of saying, hey, Alan, play what you want. I've already decided on a deck, and I don't really know why I like it. I just do. I found it like kind of very frustrating to work with someone like that who I kind of had difficulty communicating with. So, I guess really this review kind of became a bit about my frustrations and why I felt I was never able to do what Hoban was able to do. And obviously I understand that Hoban didn't specifically write the book for me, right? He wasn't thinking, I'm gonna write this book so that Alan can make his brilliant comeback and get all the best players in his circle and crush all the events. But I feel like there's certainly more players out there that are in my boat than are in Hoban's boat, where they just happen to live around a bunch of awesome players who want to like help them get better. Um, so yeah, moral of the story: if you want to be good at Yu-Gi-Oh, move to Atlanta. All right, let me know what you thought about this part of the review. Uh, hope you enjoyed.